Good afternoon, everyone. My task for this brief moment is to be MC for the MC. We didn't want him to introduce himself because that would take all afternoon, and we wouldn't get anywhere. It's one of those things. How do you introduce somebody who has already written their biography in the catalogue? So I was trying to find out something that might be a little bit different that you wouldn't know about him. And it just so happened a couple of weeks ago, I arrived at the Royal and he was there at the doorway, was smiling, and in comes one of our more senior philatelists, shall I say it that, and he sort of came in and he signed the book, and as he turned round, he was standing there and he looked, he said, "Oh, Podger. Dear, well, I haven't seen you for ages, Podger. How are you? You're looking very well for 90. And he said, and James smiled politely and said, "Well, no, actually, that's my father. He's just had his 90th birthday." He said, "Oh, your father? Oh, so you're Francis then, Francis." Oh, and in fact, Christopher Podger is here now. Happy birthday and happy 90th to you. Nice to see you. So they said, "Oh, hello, Francis." And he said, No. He said, "That's my older brother." He said, "Sorry, younger brother." Anyway, we got it wrong, so already never mind. Anyway, he said, "I'm James." "Oh, James," he said. So what did you do?" He said, "Well, I'm retired." He said, but what did you do?" He said, "Well, I was a merchant seaman." Anyway, I left the conversation at that point and moved on. But it did actually show that he's obviously got collecting in the genes, because it's obviously something that the family have. They're all members of the Royal, and he's clearly a big collector from that point of view. But as I walked away, this little thought just jumped into my mind that took me back to when I was in what I called fourth year juniors at the time. It's now year 6 for those of the people that are not up to date with the educational descriptions. And it was a Mr. Fryer who had this erstwhile job of trying to educate one of these inner city oiks like me into the finer things in life. And the thing that jumped to mind was the poem by Coleridge that was the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. And I thought about that for a while. And those of you who don't know the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, it's about a grey-bearded old man. And this man stopped somebody who was going to a wedding, as it happened, but it could have equally as well have been a philatelic event like this. And the guest who was going to the event was really quite late, and the grey-bearded old mariner insisted on stopping talking to him. And he got a little bit annoyed, but he was attracted by the twinkle in the grey-bearded ancient mariner's eye. Have you got a twinkle in your eye? Yeah, there we are. He's got the twinkle in his eye. And the conversation went on. But what was great about the Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which people who've not studied it may not know, but it was the language that was used, the narrative that Coleridge used, where he had lots of alliterative techniques. He had personification, he had repetition, he used language in a way to really bring alive the subject. So this afternoon I'd like to welcome James Podger, who is not only Captain Collector, he is the Royal's very own grey-bearded ancient mariner, who's going to use all of those techniques to enlighten us this afternoon. James, over to you.
Thank you very much. So good afternoon. Thank you for attending my presentation on collecting philatelic auction catalogues. And I'm particularly pleased that my father is here today, as he gave both my brother and myself the philatelic collecting gene, and has encouraged my collection. Not sure if that's good or bad, Dad, but thank you very much. I would like to thank Nicola Davies, our head of collections, for checking my presentation and enhancing its visual impact, and to Lauren, our new intern, for her help in organising my material in the display cases. I'm going to commence with a few slides showing a general range of catalogues. This slide shows the first Chartwell sale of British Empire, which included a post office Mauritius tuppenny, which became the most expensive single stamp sold in the UK. Chartwell. The rest of the sales were GB. The Boucher British Guiana. British Guiana is a hot area, and there have been many fantastic sales over the years. And Simon Greenwood's collection is highly anticipated, with the first part being auctioned in December and should, if I can read my notes, sorry, be a catalogue worth acquiring. The Dibble, J. Inslee Blair and Frederick Harris collections were sold over multiple sales. London Stamp Exchange, which was Ted Brow's company, held some fantastic sales over the years and all have superb postal history.
Technology's got you.
Okay. A further range of catalogues, including a difficult-to-find specialised Trinidad, the Baron Percy de Worm's Salon cell with the full-colour front on the catalogue is not too difficult to acquire, and this was talked about this morning, whereas the H.R. Harmer catalogue from New York with the standard yellow and white cover is exceptionally difficult to find. The Stewart collection of ship letters of the British Isles is worth having if you collect them, and it fits well with my West Indies and Welsh postal history interests. A number of more difficult catalogues. The William Carson St. Helena, shown here, is one of only 3 that I have, the other 2 being specialised sales of Gold Coast and Sarawak. The Beckton sale of Greece is a nice one to have, being a former president of our society. Specialist country auction catalogues are desirable, and here we have the Brodep Italian States, the Silk British North America and British West Indies, and the William Martin Hurst Australasia. The Warwick and Warwick catalogue included the C.J. Podger collection of Cyprus. The International Stamp Auction catalogue for the sale held in Johannesburg included Cayman Islands, and my father bid in the sale without success, and that was for me, not for him. This selection includes a H.R. Harmer catalogue from 1933, which is described as a valuable colonial collection with a Mauritius penny post office, and that didn't even make the top of the description. The Sotheby's catalogue includes a fine collection of Tobago. The New South Wales and New Zealand catalogues from Harmer Rook and the Great Britain and British Empire catalogues are all sales held during World War II. This is a particularly difficult period to find catalogues from. And this is where I should say, if you're going to do a presentation with John, make sure you go first. The most interesting catalogue is that for the sale of Mrs. Arthur Hind, as it includes an 1856 1-cent British Guiana that was not sold with the rest of the Arthur Hind collection. It had gone to Mrs. Hind after a legal battle with her late husband's estate. It failed to sell as it did not reach its reserve. It was finally sold in 1940 privately to Frederick Small. The BWISC Golden Jubilee catalogue included a British Guiana cotton reel cover. This sold for £20,000. I suspect that this is the highest realisation for a single cover in a specialist society auction. The Bournemouth stamp auction catalogue is of interest. Jolliffe and Flint had been holding stamp auctions for a number of years. Robson Lowe teamed up with them and then finally took over, when the catalogues then acquired his name and Jolliffe and Flint name was dropped. It is not too difficult to acquire Robson Lowe Bournemouth catalogues, although gaps do prove difficult, and there are a number of errors in their catalogue numbering. The 1935 auction of Colonel Wilson's turkey from Plumridge is one I acquired when the Royal sold off some duplicates. The Vesti catalogues are worth having, as Lord Vesti had acquired some superb proof and essay material. So I start with more about my collecting really than the general overview. So if I remember correctly, the first auction catalogue that I had was for the Rue collection of Cayman Islands, which was sold by Sotheby's in 1981. My father had attended the auction and purchased a cover to give me as a present. Sadly, I no longer have the cover, as I sold my Cayman Island collection, although I do know where it is. I was not an early collector of auction catalogues, but I did collect Cayman Islands philately, and having joined the British West Indies Study Circle, now the West Indies Philatelic Study Group, the BWISC website had a tab for West Indies auction catalogues, which was downloadable. This was compiled by Michel Forand and Charles Freeland, both sadly no longer with us. I used this listing to start to put together those catalogues listed under Cayman Islands. Michel and Charles had certain criteria for a catalogue to make their list. Single name sale being obvious, but in a general sale, the number of lots, how many proofs, essays, or colour trials, or the number and quality of postal history items. I certainly added more catalogues to my collection than they had listed, as I picked any that had an item that, in my opinion, was a good one. I suppose that, by definition, this is when I started being an auction catalogue collector. Steve Jarvis and I tried to keep the listing updated on the current website. These are two general sales with good Cayman Islands. The left sale has 142 lots, and the right-hand catalogue has the Lloyd Lowe's collection, which was 171 lots. He had exhibited at Belgica in 1972, and he had displayed at the Royal in 1971. And at this time, it's most unusual for provincial auction houses to acquire specialist collections for sale. These are now general sales, again with some good Cayman Islands. The left sale has 120 lots, the middle sale 53 lots, and the right-hand sale has the Edgar J. Marsden III collection, which was 365 lots. Marsden sold his Cayman collection after a disagreement. Basically, he threw his toys out of the pram. I attended the sale and only purchased 3 items at the time due to my financial constraints, but it was an exceedingly good sale to be at. I was not yet on the slippery slope, but then I started to add auction catalogues that featured other West Indies islands and countries covered by the BWISC. I was still using the Forand Freeland listing, as they were keeping it updated. The more modern catalogues were easy to get hold of, but I was actively seeking older catalogues to enhance my collection. The slippery slope was developing. I managed to acquire the catalogues for what is probably the best British West Indies or West Indies collection ever to have come to auction, the Major Charlton Henry Parts 1 and 2. At some time later, I was at H.H. Sales and acquired the pair privately hardbound at the London works of the Solicitors Law Stationery Society on the 23rd of March 1962. And it's always great when the information is in something that's been bound to tell you not only who bound it, but the date it was bound. And this had previously belonged to Victor Toag, a past president of the BWISC. I do apologise that John gave almost the same slide this morning, but there we are. We didn't compare notes, that was the main thing. At some point on a visit to Spink, I was given a copy of the John Michael publication, British Empire Stamp Auction Catalogues for Provenance, 1921 to 2002. This is a very useful publication, especially as it lists a major series of sales. Burris, not a complete listing, for which that one needs to have the Trenchard list. Butte, 4 of the 6 sales. Cartier, both sales from 1977. Caspare, 4 of the 16 sales held between 1955 and 1958. Dale Lichtenstein, Series 1, 10 of the 11 sales held between 1968 and 1971. Series 2, 6 of the 11 sales held between 1989 and 1992. And as John mentioned earlier, a further series of sales, number 23 to 26, was held between 1977 and 2004, with a further portion not numbered also in 2004, and the library sale was held in 2001. So it's worth collecting this series purely because there was a library sale. Danson, 8 sales in 1971. Ferrari, 11 of the 14 sales held between 1921 and 1925. A further sale, Greece, was held in 1929. Hind, 5 of the 11 sales held in 1934 and 1935. Ilam, 4 of the 6 sales held in 1986 and 1987. Manus, 11 sales held in 1932 and 1933. Pack, 6 sales held between 1944 and 1949. And I'm going to get a problem here. Prapoporchetovic, 5 sales during 1933, Mike. 1933. Retford, 5 sales held in 1950 and 1951. Thank you. Saybold, 3 sales in 1910. Stevens, 3 of the 6 sales held in 1937 and 1938. And Yardley, 4 of the 11 sales held 1944 and 1945. And Yates, 9 sales held between 1939 and 1945. I have all these except for the Refford and Seabold, with many hardbound by the auction house responsible. As you can tell by the numbers of catalogues and the dates, these are not easy to complete. This shows my Dale Lichtenstein catalogues. A slight cheat with these, as I had sales 23 to 26 bound to replicate the previous binding. The bound volumes were purchased from the John Michael Library, and the 2 unbound I managed to find at a later date. And as John showed 3 of these this morning, this now is the 5 of them. These are the sales that should strictly be included in the series, although only Lichtenstein, for sales held between 1950 and 1966. These were sold after his death by his daughter, Louise Boyle Dale. This is my Ferrari set, nicely contained in 2 quarter leather Solenders, with the Napier index in matching half leather. I purchased this set from the late Brian Morehouse, and John kindly drove to his house to collect it for me. I have to say I was very lucky, as John forwarded to me on my ship Brian's latest sales list, for which this was included. So thank you again, John. The standard housebound binding in half leather is red for British colonials and green for foreign. Now I know John this morning showed 2 both bound in red, but the foreign should be in green. An excellent pair that look good on any library shelf, as I'm sure you'll agree, and black and white plates at the time. This is a very difficult set of catalogues to find, especially housebound. I spotted this hardbound set amongst the late Simon Goldblatt's library, and I bought his whole library to obtain it. Most find the name difficult to pronounce, including me, Prapoporchetovic. Must practice that one more. So I was very lucky to acquire it, and it's a housebound set, similar to the Manus binding you'll see later. The Yardley collection appears to me to be the easiest of the Baby Harmer's catalogues to acquire. Perhaps I'm just lucky, as I have some loose, a set bound in card, and probably the best set I've ever seen, bound in half leather with the E. Libris Robert Blake Yardley bookplate inside. And this came from the Alex Schofield Library. A lovely item to have in my library. Early bound sets sometimes have the front cover for the first catalogue, but then this is removed for the rest of the run. My bound set of Manus is such a set. Note to self, extra catalogues required. I do have them all singly, as original catalogues. It just means more space required as well, unfortunately. The photo plates were inserted loosely into the catalogues, and I suspect that extras were produced, as I have acquired an additional loose set of photo plates. And this shows the standard plumberage binding. Some auction houses have produced either articles or books on their history, and these can provide useful catalogue information. Wolfgang Masson wrote 100 Years of Cornfila, 1919 to 2019, which includes 2 appendices on special catalogues and named sales. Wolfgang also wrote a book on the history of Shanahan's auctions, which described and illustrated every catalogue. Although there were not many auctions, this is a very difficult run to complete. and I only have 40%. A recent acquisition is Sweden in Philatelic, a bibliography and saga of named sales and important collections sold in public, 1907 to 2020. This was written by Thomas Barringer and Jonas Hallström. It lists all the important sales of Swedish material, and importantly, has an introduction by Brian Birch with his thoughts on pioneer auction catalogues, where he mentions the earliest auction catalogue with a stamp lot, as Jonas said earlier, the earliest complete auction catalogue, the first with photographic images and plates, and also listing the earliest dedicated auction sales of stamps by country. Some auction houses also have online resources listing their auction catalogues, and this really is a good research area. By this time, John and I have discovered that we both like collecting philatelic literature, and I can firmly lay the blame at his feet for his encouragement to collect more. All joking aside, he has an excellent knowledge of auction catalogues and has been of great help to me in building up my collection. A number of years ago, when I was away at sea, I was looking at a provincial auctions catalogue online, and one lot of literature stood out, a hardbound set of Robson Lowe postal history auction catalogues with a very low estimate, £60 if I remember correctly. I telephoned and spoke with Arthur O'Hanlon, who was not too interested in describing the lot to me over the telephone. All he said to me was, "It's very heavy." You need more of a description than that. So with a little bit of persuading, i.e. I told him I was telephoning him from the middle of the ocean, he agreed. Based on his verbal description, I sent in my bid and secured the set for just under £1,000. My father kindly sent the cheque to pay for the lot. Yes, unfortunately, I had to pay him back. When I was next on leave, I drove to collect the set, and Arthur, not surprisingly, was very pleased. Interestingly, a philatelic book dealer had seen the lot in the catalogue, but did not view it, even though he drove past the auction house. That was very lucky for me. It would have cost me a lot more money, I'm sure. So, very happy. Another good purchase was at Spink. Interestingly enough, the front cover of this catalogue does not mention literature, although the sale included the John Michael Philatelic Library, featuring 135 lots. This is where I managed to acquire my Dale Lichtenstein and Lilly housebound catalogues, as well as some others. Unfortunately, several other literature collectors, including Thomas Barringer and Charles Freeland, were in the room. A real disappointment when they arrived. I can tell you, my face dropped. Yeah. Anyway, I managed to take away several large boxes attached to a trolley and had to take a taxi to Waterloo Station, and it was a real struggle to get home, but well worth the effort. The things literature collectors do. But the best purchase has to be my housebound run of Christie's Robson Lowe and Spink catalogues between 1981 and 1999. This was one lot in a Spink sale that presumably no one else noticed. 75 housebound volumes for sales in Hong Kong, Melbourne, London, New York, Singapore, and Zurich. A wealth of information for £90. I have to say, I had a friend of mine working at Spink at the time, and he collected them, drove them to his mother's house up in Derbyshire, Northamptonshire. John then drove down to pick them up from this chap's mother's house, and when I was on leave, I drove to John's to collect them. And my shipping charge, 2 bottles of wine. What a deal. You missed that lot, Thomas. These came from the Christie's Robson Lowe office in New York when it was closed. They had the contents shipped back to the UK. So my £90 cost them a lot more in the shipping it across the Atlantic. I was very lucky. Private treaty. Sorry?
When was the sale?
I can't remember, Jonas. Yeah. Private treaty catalogues. As important as auction catalogues are, we should not forget private treaty listings, as they complement auction catalogues. The best of these were those issued by Robson Lowe. Sometimes the collections listed for sale remained unsold and were then offered for auction. These private treaty lists can be more difficult to find than the auction catalogues. The Dr. Mielville collections did not all sell and were then consigned for auction. The cover shows the very rare Dominica 1 penny on sixpence green. You've got a record of that, Simon. On the front cover of the Mielville catalogue. Yeah. The Adu collection. Oh, sorry, this is more private treaty. Sorry. I'm always on the lookout for examples that I do not own. The John Aspinwall was rumoured to be the most expensive collection at the time. H.R. Harmer also issued some, but not too many. This is the only one I've seen that I have. There might be more. The Adu collection. Leon Adu was an early Cayman Island collector who displayed at the Royal and organised the 1912 GB Philatelic Congress in Margate. For many years, I wondered what had happened to his collection. How had it been disposed of, as there was no auction recording the sale? Literally a couple of years ago, I found this W.H. Peckett bargain list, number 56, announcing that he has the collection for sale, including all the rarities, and more interestingly, giving descriptions of 2 covers that I have never seen or even heard about. This information was also unknown to any of my fellow Cayman collectors. So that was a real find. And it's a shame it was after I sold my Cayman Island collection that I discovered this. Still looking for the 2 covers, though. Resumes, reviews. H.R. Harmer started producing resumes in 1925 and Robson Lowe in 1938. These are a great addition to auction catalogues, as they list information from previous sales and also some upcoming sales. This helps one to know whether one is missing a catalogue within their collecting interests. I have complete runs of both and 3 volumes hardbound in half leather containing a part run. So again, something else I'm looking for, some more bound ones. Unusual proof and provisional catalogues. A few years ago, I had a meeting with Dieter Mikkelsen about consigning some material to auction. And he happened to have with him a proof copy of the Next Cola catalogue. And the giveaway, soft-bound and not hard-bound. He mentioned that it was one of only 3 produced. I must have looked very interested, as he let me have it. What an addition to my collection. Recently, Corinphilia had a viewing in London for part 1 of the Beresford Wiley collection of GB, and they produced 30 copies of the provisional catalogues for part 2 and part 3. And Jonas had placed those that didn't go at the viewing at the Royal, down in the reception area, for anybody interested. Now, I happened to be going up in the lift with your colleague, Tobias? Tobias, yeah, with Tobias. And I was talking to him, and he mentioned, the viewing, yes. He said, we had a good viewing. He said, we've bought the preview catalogues that we didn't, the provisional catalogues that we didn't know, we bought them. And they said, there was only 30 of each produced. So he got out on whatever floor it was, and I was hitting the button like this to go back to the ground floor. So I got back to the ground floor, and I managed to acquire a pair for the Royal, which I gave Nicola to make sure we had a pair here. I got a copy for John, because he wasn't at the meeting, and a pair for myself. So I thought that was exceedingly good. So yeah, and a very nice addition to the collection. So we'll find the mouse. There we are, there is a mouse. H.R. Harmer's produced a run of small format auction catalogues from 1942 to 1946 for paper saving, known as Baby Harmer's. These are scarce, and I do not have many. Charles Freeland had around 200, and they fetched a very high price in his literature sale, around about 10,000 euros. They are certainly catalogues for one to keep one's eyes open for. The vast majority are in the standard Harmer's yellow, but occasionally they printed them in other colours. As you can see here, there's 3 white ones and 1 greeny blue. Robson Lowe housebound sales. These catalogues are another good area to collect. Robson Lowe advertised these for sale after the auction was held. They are usually interleaved with the realisations bound in. Interestingly, this Meredith Cayman Islands catalogue still has the invoice inside. The Watkin one is my favourite, Cayman Islands naturally. Another area where I would like to acquire more. This slide doesn't look like I'm being greedy with 3 Meredith catalogues. But if any one of you would like to swap one of those for one that you have that I don't have, then please speak to me. Robson Lowe used different colours for his housebound runs that were available for purchase. Red for British Empire, as shown here, brown for his Bournemouth sales, orange for postal history sales, etc. These are the 3 bound runs that I actively try to acquire to fill any gaps. The earliest British Empire bound volume that I have is 1947 to 1948. Realisations are included and normally found in a pocket inside the back cover. It goes without saying that occasionally not all the realisations are in place, as they might have gone AWOL. He was not adverse to asking for catalogues to be returned and would stick a label on one from the next sale or a future sale, saying that if you did not want the particular catalogue, please return it, as he had other collectors who would like it. I'm thinking perhaps he had run out of particular catalogue to include in the housebound runs. Robson Lowe tended to use Bournemouth as an outlet for the more common material, although several high-end items were sold there. He utilised a busy buyer service, where for a charge one was not sent the whole catalogue, but just a cutout of the descriptions and the image, if applicable, of items that one had registered collecting. So you needed to register your area of interest to get the little bit that you needed. I do remember my father was a subscriber to this service. Hence, I didn't get complete catalogues from him, apart from the odd one, and a lot of Cyprus ones. The Colonel Green collection. So I'm just going to mention 3 collectors, actually, where putting together a set of catalogues where the material has been sold is difficult or could prove difficult. Firstly, Colonel Green, 1942 to 1946. 29 sales sold through 11 different auction houses. This is my bound set here, and I cheated. I bought them as a bound set. Burris, which John again mentioned, which was sold through 15 different auction houses and via private treaty. But lastly, there's a modern difficult set to put together, Charles Freeland. As mentioned, he sold his literature at Kola, and previously his Cayman Islands through Victoria Stamp Company. Then following his death, his material was placed through Spink, Stanley Gibbons, Murray Payne, and the Victoria Stamp Company. But the important part is one sale at Spink did not have an auction catalogue produced. This had to be downloaded, but didn't include any illustrations. So if you download today, there's still no illustrations. I printed out my copy on board the ship. Paper saving, well, saving my paper. The Burris collection of Japan, which was sold on October the 12th, 1963, by the Kanai Stamp Company in Akasaka, Japan. My copy was previously owned by Major General Donald L. Hardy, USAF. What makes this catalogue valuable is that I have the floor bid ticket. Mine's number 000128. And this allowed the holder entry to bid in the sale. A similar example of this catalogue with the floor bid ticket sold for €1,000 in 2019. This is probably the most valuable single catalogue that I own. providing there's two collectors who are interested. Always like that. This is 3 auction catalogues that all have a story to tell. And who doesn't like a good story? And I'm not ruining your stories, David. So you've got they all have stories in addition to the auction catalogue. So Fred Melville wrote about the Mayfair find in a hardbound, large format book on glossy paper, which also reproduced the auction catalogue and has a pocket in the back for the additional plates. The Webster collection of British Guiana was written about in a separate booklet by the Williams brothers. The Crocker collection was also written about by Fred Melville in a separate booklet. More ancillary material to build up one's collection and fill one's shelves. If a collector has written a book or had a book written about them or their collection, then I try to have the book and their auction catalogue. As well as the 3 shown, you've got examples Ibbetson's Mauritius, Diamonds New Zealand, and Smith's Egypt. They're all good examples of the former. Edition Door, produced by the Global Philatelic Network, and Feldman's Great Philatelic Collections are good examples of the latter. I've mentioned a few auctions where I have bought catalogues, but it would be remiss of me not to talk about philatelic literature sales, as they're very important to the literature collector. This is just a selection of the many that I have, which include auction catalogues, some just a few, and others running to hundreds of lots. Sylvester Colby held good literature sales in the United States. The Mayer Library included 19 lots, with 40 Burroughs catalogues fetching the highest price. The Luff Part 2, 23 lots. Ward was held over 3 sales and included 122 lots in Part 1, with his 14 Ferrari catalogues making $250. Part 2 with 109 lots, with the 29 Colonel Green catalogues making $175. And Part 3 with 83 lots. Charles Furby from Canada held some fantastic literature auctions. For example, their 8th sale included 412 lots of named sales and 210 lots by area of interest and auction firm. And this is a phenomenal amount. Schwanker held specialist sales with many lots illustrated in colour. The George Alvius catalogue is not easy to find and included 41 lots, with the 5 Newbury sales making $160. Cavendish continued to hold specialist literature auctions, which always include auction catalogues. The one from 2001 had 71 lots, and the one from 2017, which included duplicates from the Royal, had 77 lots, including some very early auction catalogues. A quick plug then for Cavendish is in their next sale coming up in July, there is a large number of philatelic auction catalogues that came from me, so they're good quality and they're being sold to raise funds for the Royal. So I should encourage you to bid. Next week. There was, and 6 boxes came straight to the Royal for items they didn't have them already. The ELA Auctions catalogue, which is scarce, from 1997, includes a full-page write-up on the Western Philatelic Library and has 104 lots of auction catalogues. The Heinrich Kohler catalogue, number 364 from 2017, features the Charles Freeland and Erevan literature collection, and it just shows how big a bibliophile Charles Freeland was, where his name's listed above Erevan. This sale includes 203 lots, with some of the best auction house runs ever put together, privately, and it's full of rarities. John and I drove to the sale in the hope of picking up a few bargains. Yes. Enough of that said. Needless to say, there were no bargains to be had, and we only came away with a few lots. Yes, very disappointing that, but a good boy's jolly anyway. Sadly, auction houses are less interested in taking in literature to sell than in the past, due to the bulky nature and the extortionate postage rates, which deters buyers. Luckily, I have good contacts and some decent suitcases, which you might have seen me lugging between London-based auctions and the Royal. I'm certain my arms are getting longer. My talk wouldn't be complete without mentioning the catalogue for my Cayman Island collection, and obviously one that all auction catalogue collectors should have in their library. It was one of Stanley Gibbons' signature sales, and it comes soft-bound, but there were a limited number of produced hardbound. As I say, every good philatelic library should have a copy, and I do apologise because as they're produced with black and gold covers, they are very difficult to scan, so my apologies for the image. It's no better where I'm looking here. This is just a reminder that this is the world's first dedicated stamp auction catalogue, and the Royal would very much like to add this to our collection. The image shown is fittingly taken from the Crawford collection at the British Library. So as mentioned earlier, if anybody does happen to have one, without going to rob the British Library, of course, we'd very much like it. There are not too many pitfalls with collecting auction catalogues. The most obvious is, are all the pages present and plates, if they are, separate? Removal of pages is a frequent issue, as a collector might only want one page before handing on the catalogue. Before this, early collectors would cut out a single image to put with their stamp collection to have an example, as they might not have been in a position to acquire the real item. This can sometimes be hard to spot, especially if someone at a later date has reinserted the item. And I have to say, Charles Freeland was very good at this. Early catalogues only have a basic description, which might be something like GB 1D black, plate 11 on envelope. Not exactly descriptive and so difficult to trace an item. Whereas nowadays the majority of lots have good descriptions and colour photographs. An annoying thing is when housebound sales are incomplete, usually because the auction house does not have an example of the catalogue to bind in, so the binding is done without it. You might only find out that a catalogue is missing by checking against a master listing. And the Royal Library has a few examples like this, where the one catalogue or two catalogues haven't been bound in a housebound run that we have been presented by the auction house. In my bound run of Robson Lowe Postal History auction catalogues that I bought, I mentioned earlier, I discovered that the Gravison collection catalogue was not bound in. I had a copy, so that was no problem. It's just loose on the shelf. But finding realisations can prove difficult. And this is where, excuse me, the Royal is extremely useful, as their holdings mostly include realisations. Rusty staples. This provides a dilemma to leave as is or remove the rusty staple and have the catalogue loose, or even buy a decent stapler and restaple. This is a choice for the individual, but personally, I leave as is. I live in a 3-bedroom mid-terraced house, and the biggest problem is space. One requires a lot of space to fit bookcases and or shelving, and of course floors and walls must be suitably load-bearing. John and Nicola have both stayed with me, and I'm sure that they both enjoyed sleeping in a library, as my guest room is full of bookcases. Luckily at the moment there's still a bed. The right-hand image shows a publication in one of the plastic boxes, Food for Thought. This is a Valancy publication listing literature for sale, not a philatelic recipe book. I have gone past the slippery slope and I'm on the precipice. Although not a philatelic publication, the title says it all. I've been asked, do I just collect auction catalogues to put them on a shelf, or do I use them? And that's a good question. The simple answer is both. I like having nicely bound catalogues, as they do look attractive in a bookcase, whereas unbound ones, not so, but you can buy bookcases with non-see-through doors, so that's fine. Yes, I do use them, and I'll pick one up every now and then to flick through. It is often fun to look at the material and think, I wish that I'd been around when a particular item was sold. Of course, I might not have been able to afford it because I wouldn't have the same money, but it's nice to think that way. Unfortunately, at present, my unbound catalogues are in a bit of a muddle, so finding a particular catalogue might take some time. Reorganising them is on the list of jobs, although not at the top. So, where do I go from here? Well, recently I divested myself of 120 boxes of literature, including many auction catalogues, as I mentioned. 6 boxes of material were needed by the Royal, and say the rest have been placed at auction to benefit the Society. So why have I done this? Well, I did this to create space for me to fill, yes, wait for the punchline, which I've already succeeded in filling. It's terrible. I do not intend any time soon to stop collecting auction catalogues, but I just really have to make sure I can house them. Philip and my late wife once said to me, "If only you just collected stamps." That says it all, really, doesn't it? She was also very concerned at one point that the ceiling in the loft would come down on our bedroom. And anyway, I hope you've enjoyed my presentation and it has stimulated you enough that you also want to collect philatelic auction catalogues. I'm happy to take any questions, although I might not necessarily have the answers. Thank you so much.
Entertaining and lovely to see that there is a use for the auction catalogue, mainly to make sure that James's house doesn't float away in a flood. But anyway, there we go. Thank you very much, James. Do we have any questions, please? If we don't, it makes my job very easy because I don't have to run around with a mic.
Oh, go on,
Oh, there we are
Rob.
then.
There's always one, isn't there, Rob?
Oh, sorry. Okay, there we are.
There's always
Thank
one,
you.
Rob.
When are you going to scan them all?
Oh, I say, don't ask an awkward question. I know where you live. Yes. No. Are you offering? No. Okay. No. 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 I don't do scanning. Oh, there's more questions now. People have popped up out of the woodwork.
I'm just wondering how you index them to retrieve them. Do you do them by auction house run, and in which case, how do you know how they were sold, or do you do them by country and put all the Barbados name sales in one place, or how do you do it?
I have a listing on my computer of every auction catalogue that I purchased or have acquired, and I do them by house run and date. So if you like, Robson Lowe might run to 6 pages, say, or something like that. Yeah.
I just wanted to chip in, preempting what I'm going to say tomorrow. I invested in an overhead scanner, and I'm working through scanning loads of auction catalogues. So I'm going to put a plea in tomorrow to say anybody else who wants their catalogue scanned, please get in touch with me.
Yeah, you want my few thousand then, yeah? No.
As long as you bring them up to me.
I did used to display literature for local societies, and I would offer it as one of the topics. So apart from doing, say, West Indies General or Cayman Islands display or Welsh postal history, I did philatelic literature, and I used to lump around boxes, crates of books to put out, and auction catalogues to put on the frames for people to see, and I did it for a few societies, and it was pretty hard work. You can imagine when it's raining and things like that. But anyways, I was gratified once because Derek Diamond, after he'd written his book, came to Farnham, where I was president. The society doesn't exist now, where I did my collection of literature display and talk. And he said to me afterwards, he said, "I wish I'd heard your talk before I started writing my book." And he meant that kindly, not the, yeah. But I was pleased to hear that. But I say, yeah, it's a big, difficult thing lugging boxes of stuff around to show people. Anyway, so thank you.
Any other questions? Oh yeah,
Peter.
here we are. Peter.
I don't think your answer to the Vice President was really very satisfactory.
Oh, sorry.
Because he asked a question which certainly came to my mind. I don't collect auction catalogues per se, but I have auction catalogues from lots of different auction houses, all of which have material in which interests me. And I wondered if, it seems to me that you collect them according to the house, in other words, the auction house. How do you know that Cayman Islands exists in the right order, in which and how and when?
Well, Cayman Islands is quite simple because I look at the original forehand freeland listing on the West Indies website, which Steve and I update. So I can do all the West Indies as per se from those. Otherwise, it's date and number order. Most catalogues have a numbering system, and therefore you can collect them by number. So Robson Low are mostly numbered, some incorrectly, and you can collect them by number. So I tried to collect by West Indies, any West Indies, start with that. And then I'm collecting Robson Low catalogues, I collect Harmer's catalogues. I collect catalogues that I like. So I've got a lot of catalogues that might be one-off from an auction house I wouldn't necessarily collect. I was originally quite British Empire focused in my collecting habits, but as you've seen, I've diversed and got a lot of foreign as well now. So yeah, I'm sort of building up and adding all the time, Peter. So, but I do have a listing of what I have. I think that's the main thing, and try and keep them in order.
Okay, so if I wanted to look up all the sales of North Borneo SG1, how would you do that?
Well, I couldn't do you by a stamp. I don't have a listing by a particular stamp. I could point you to the North Borneo auction catalogues, say, but not by a particular stamp. But if you collect North Borneo yourself, then you should get all your North Borneo catalogues. Yes. Date order is a good way of doing it. Date order, recommended.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, at that point, it is coffee time. I'd like to thank James for his presentation. If you have any further questions, you can bother him over your cup of tea, which is presented. James, thank you.